Welcome, one and all, to our sixth edition of Breakaway Rail Talk. This one is going to be really exciting because not only do we have famed author Kim Wickens, author of Lexington, but we're also going to talk about, not only Lexington's career and his establishment as a sire, and also a little bit about history. So it's going to be part history, part exciting racing, part thoroughbred knowledge. Very well worth it. You're going to want to stay for the entire interview. So we're here with Kim Wickens, author of Lexington, which was 325 pages of magic, history, and excitement for me. And Kim, we are going to start right into, tell us a little bit about who Lexington was and what his impact was on the industry.
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for having me on the show. And I'm a huge fan of the show, and I watch it, and I also follow you guys in the thoroughbred industry. So it's an honor for me to be here. And I also have my fantastic Rail Talk mug.
Yeah, right.
Full of my delicious coffee. But, Lexington was a 19th century racehorse and sire. And, we really think of him, for those people in the industry as basically our foundation sire. He was a ginormous, impact on early thoroughbred breeding. I mean, we would not have Domino. We would not have, Native Dancer, Northern Dancer, Mr. Prospector if it had not been for Lexington, and not only was he very impactful, on the years, following him, but I mean, he reaches even into our today's, horses. I mean, if you look at the pedigrees of our famous horses today, actually all of our thoroughbreds, I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find a thoroughbred that does not contain Lexington somewhere as a cross in the pedigree. Of course, we're talking many years back, but he's there. And he's really, in that sense, a shaper of the breed, to a large extent. But he wasn't just this phenomenal, sire that we think about, for the American thoroughbred. He was an incredible, fantastic racehorse as well. And really, I wanted to focus on that part of the book because no one really ever has focused on his racing career, and to show, basically what was the heart and the drive and the courage of this horse that then becomes the great sire that we know.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, not only was he leading sire a number of times during his stallion career, but as a racehorse, he, if I remember correctly, he ran 7 times, won 6, and finished second once, and did it at distances that are just unheard of these days.
It was insane. Yeah.
Yeah. So walk us back a little bit to that part of history where, where horses would run in races and the heats would be 4 miles long.
It was a very different period, and so horses back then, we're talking about the, pre-Civil War, the antebellum, period of our history. And I mean, so Lexington was foaled in 1850. He was running in 1854, 1855. And so in that period of our history here in America, the horses were running the heat system of racing. And so these heats could run anywhere from a mile heat up to 4 mile heat, 4 mile heat being the upper echelon of racing, what we would call a grade 1 today. And so these 4 mile heats, not every horse could run a 4 mile heats, but those that could, that was like your top tier racehorse. And this was really a system that we inherited over from Great Britain because they were running King's plates over there, that were 4 miles, in distance. And so we kind of incorporated that and brought that over into America, into this heat system. So horse back then, if it was running a 4 mile heat race, would run 4 miles, and then they would take, about a 45-minute cooling down period to recoup. And then they would go out there and they would keep doing this until you had at least one horse win 2 heats. I mean, so in the case of Lexington, he usually dominated it in 2 heats and the race was over. But theoretically, and it did happen in history, horses could run 12, 16-mile races in one day, wow. And just insane.
Yeah. And the book goes into detail, not only how difficult it was for the horses, but for the humans that were involved, also the trainers,
yeah.
the owners, and especially the jockeys.
Yes.
And I love the detail about how jockeys, sometimes couldn't even come out for the second round, basically, because they were just so exhausted riding these, 1,200-pound beasts, around 4 miles. So it was really, aside from the horse, you got into the people, which is wonderful. And you also got into the backdrop of the Civil War, which was, basically tearing the country apart. Kentucky was kind of like one of those swing states that was getting pillaged by the North and the South, and really had an impact on the horse industry and specifically on Lexington. Could you talk a little bit about that as well?
Yeah. So Lexington, after he's retired due to vision complications, so after he's retired after only 7 races, he stands in Versailles and then later Midway, Kentucky. And he stands at the stud of Woodburn Farm, which is a burgeoning horse farm owned by Robert Aitchison Alexander, who was a British citizen but had grown up in Midway, comes back to start basically his vision of the ideal thoroughbred breeding farm. And it was very much a system that he had seen in Great Britain when he was there living, and tried to bring that kind of system over into America, where we had authenticated pedigrees, where we had a system and a purpose for breeding the horse. And he also wanted to, his vision was not just to allow individuals to bring their mares in to breed with his, stallions, but also to then breed them to brood mares that he had, and then put those, the foals, up for auction. And that really at that time had not occurred in America. So he was really the precursor to, Fasig-Tipton and the Keeneland auction, all of these that we know of today really kind of originated out of Alexander's idea that he, implemented. And back then, so when he purchases Lexington to be his star stallion, and he's not sure, is this going to be, a good stallion? Is it not? But he takes a chance, and he pays the highest price ever paid for a racehorse back then, which was $15,000. Today, we would just laugh at that, right? But back then, it was unheard of. He buys this horse, and he's basically just hoping and praying that this horse turns out to be a great stallion. And he was. But this dream of his is interrupted several times and frustrated, and almost never actually realizes, because of the fact that the Civil War is going on in Kentucky, which is a torn state, a border state. And there were all of these guerrilla factions, that were offshoots of the Confederacy and so forth, that were running around, disrupting all of the horse farms in the area, and especially Woodburn Farm. And it was their goal to steal these horses, not only to replenish their own war mounts, but also in some cases for kidnapping purposes, for ransom.
Right. Yeah, it really talks about things that we don't even think of today, about people coming in and, you go in and you breed your mare and you have this great foal, and we don't even think about like guerrilla factions coming in and stealing them or coming in and using them as a war horse. But there's a lot that went on, during the Civil War that disrupted the horse industry specifically, and may have waylaid a lot of horses' careers. But Lexington proved on, and he had a number of foals that were, that were classic winners, that won races, that now even still have a lot of importance, like the Belmont and the Preakness and the Travers. Exactly. So it's still, he still has this, this importance in our industry. And Kim, one of the things that I noticed when I was reading the book is you talk about how Americans went over to Europe and tried to bring over back the best bred horses that they could afford. And we're seeing history repeat itself, first with the Saudis, a number of years ago, and now most recently with Japan coming in and buying a lot of our champions. And now they're coming here and racing and kind of eating our lunch because of a lot of the horses here. Are you seeing that kind of pattern repeat itself like it was with Lexington?
I think history definitely repeats itself, and most definitely, I mean, back in the era before Lexington became, the dominant horse here, I mean, Americans, they wanted the blood horse and they wanted the very best. And so, of course, they went to England, which was the originator of racing, right? And where all of the thoroughbred Thoroughbred stood, and they were importing those horses and using those horses then to cross with mares that they had and to basically create, their version of the Thoroughbred. And so most definitely, back then they were going to where the best bloodstock was. And it definitely seems that that's what's occurring now too, as well.
Yeah. And you talk about, Americans and how the fact that they had to start something new and be, entrepreneurial. You yourself were very entrepreneurial in the writing of this book, because there was really nothing that was kind of of substance, right? About
Right.
Lexington and his stallion career. So, and you were doing that all while you were also practicing as a defense attorney,
Right.
out west. So how did you have time to do all this?
I don't know. I honestly don't know how I did it. I look back and I think, how did I do all that? But, at the time, yeah, so I was a sole practitioner and I was running, my own practice. But, I read about Lexington when I was reading a book about Man of War. And that was kind of what inspired it for me, because I had never heard, of Lexington, and I'm a racehorse lover. I've heard of all these horses, but, when I started to look into Lexington, I discovered that there was nothing out there.
Yeah.
There was nothing out there. I mean, there were some newspaper articles, and of course, John Hervey had written about Lexington for Racing in America, a publication for the Blood Horse back in 1944. But I mean, there was nothing else substantive out there on this horse or his history. And really, to appease myself, I started researching, this horse through interlibrary loans, and then ultimately going to Keeneland and everywhere. I mean, to New Orleans, to New York, I mean, you name it. I was there trying to dig up this history and put it together.
Right.
It was a lot of work.
It had to have been a labor of love, and it really came together. You can feel your passion for the industry in general, and specifically for Lexington in the book. Again, I'm here with Kim Wickens, author of Lexington, which is a worldwide success and an award-winning novel. And with, Christmas and Hanukkah coming right around the corner, it's a great gift for those horse lovers that you have. I'm going to embarrass you for a second, Kim, because we actually have some of the reviews from Amazon that I just want to read, because they're so telling. From S. Mahaffey, this book was my first introduction to racehorses. I found myself immersed in the life of Lexington, and now know I will not take horse racing as not important. I think that anyone, racehorse fan or not, will find this an amazing life during a time which much happened in the United States history from 1850 to 1875. How do you feel when you hear and you read some of the reviews about your book?
I appreciate, first of all, I appreciate people that read the book, and that's really hard, as a debut author, for people to give it a chance. And so I thank everyone who has done that, but I'm really appreciative when I read those reviews. And of course you want to, we were writing this book, with the idea of having it reach a broad audience. That was our goal, and so it really pleases me when someone will write in or leave a review that is not from the industry, or that is not someone who follows racing. Or we've even had some in there for people that are disgusted with racing, that have given the book a chance and come away from it with a better perspective about racing, or that, as in that one article or in that one review, said that, oh, I get it, and it's a sport that not only served a purpose as a sport, but it also impacted, in a great way, a piece of our history in terms of the horses being taken in for cavalry purposes and so forth, and so, it really horse racing serves, such a greater goal in so many respects. And so I think it's wonderful for people that don't have any connection with the industry to see that.
Right. Absolutely. And it's really amazing when you read the reviews of just how many people actually start off with, I was not a fan of racing, or I'm not a horse lover, or, I wasn't really interested in the racing industry. And there's always that big but about just how enthralled they are with the story of Lexington himself. And Lexington, had a rival. Some would argue that Lecomte was maybe even a little bit better racehorse than Lexington. So you go back and we think rivals like Alydar and Affirm, then Easygoer and Sunday Silence, and Bet Twice and Lost Code. But, here back in Civil War time, you had Lecomte and Lexington, and they were like, nip and tuck when they ran against each other. And that's what a big part of the first few chapters are about. Tell me a little bit about that rivalry.
So both of these horses, and we're talking about, these were both 4 Mile Heat, they were the top horses, the Alydar and the Affirmed. And so they were the top horses, that really kind of the nation, had turned to look at this rivalry, that kind of crept up because these horses were so competitive against each other. And they really were, as you say, almost identical in terms of their abilities and their gifts. And, the issue of speed, starts to come in. So this isn't just these races aren't just about stamina, and courage, although they primarily are, but the whole idea of how fast can a horse run, starts to enter the equation. And it was always there, but it really, reached a pinnacle with these two horses. And they were both extremely fast for their era. Not for our times. They were slow compared to our times, but back then for what they were doing, they were the fastest of the fast. And so you have this speed rivalry going on between these two horses. And really it was quite astonishing for people to see because these types of speeds that these horses, Lecomte and Lexington, were turning in had not been seen in America and had not been seen, for years and years and years. And so to see these two horses all of a sudden come up with that kind of talent was just really something that the nation in general just kind of glommed onto and followed.
Right. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that they're both sons of Boston. So it wasn't even just that they were, that they were identical in race and competitiveness and talent. But they were, we don't call them half brothers in the industry, but in essence, they were by the same sire. And back then, crops were a lot smaller. So they probably were closer to half brothers than what we see today. And their legacies live on. I mean, you look at the 3-year-old, Derby Road and the Lecomte, which is coming up mid-January in New Orleans. And obviously the Lexington, which is annually run at Keeneland. Those are both Derby point races. So their history lives on, not only genetically, but also on the race schedule. That's got to be, amazing. I can't remember too many horses from 200 years ago almost that still have relevance, where they have major Derby implications. Yeah,
that is amazing.
And it'll continue to live on. And not only those horses live on because of their prowess and because of their genetics, and obviously because of the horses that the races that they've been named after, but also because they're huge parts of this book. And again, I can't say just how enjoyable it was. I don't have the words for it. I leafed through it so quickly. And obviously I like the horse industry a little bit, but I didn't know a lot of the stories about Lexington and Lecomte and really the nation as how we were growing and getting together. So I really can't thank you enough for writing this book. And having it be a part of our landscape in the horse industry. Once again, it's Lexington. You can buy the book wherever books are sold, Amazon, et cetera, et cetera. And Kim, I think we have a trivia question at least, that will enable one of our listeners to actually get an autographed copy from you. Is that correct?
So I think that probably one of the best questions and that we can throw out there to the audience is, one of Lexington's sons was the first winner of the Travers Stakes. And who was that?
Ooh, that's a great one. Any hint? Can you give our audience a hint? Because some of them don't read, so they have to,
Well, so this is a horse that was owned by John Hunter, and eventually also wins the Saratoga Cup, and kind of had a name very similar to Lexington in that it was named after a place.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, good. Nope. I think the audience can definitely figure that out. And again, there's a wonderful signed copy of Lexington, the novel, that's awaiting the first person that can send us the answer to that trivia question. Kim, I can't thank you enough, not only for your diligence in writing the book, but also for coming on and talking to us about it. It's just a phenomenal book. And I'm looking forward to, is there another one that may be coming out soon?
Yes, I'm starting to research, and I like history and sports. And so this is kind of a takeoff of that. It's also of a very earlier time period. That's all I want to say. But I'm starting my research, and I'm looking for the story within all of the facts. There has to be a compelling story there to make it work. So
no, that's excellent.
That's what I'm looking for right now.
Good. Well,
history and sports, but that also impact, just like horse racing, on a greater scale.
Yep. Wow. Fantastic. Well, we can't wait for that book to come out. And again, please come on and even if it's not about horse racing, we love Lexington, and I'm sure we're going to love your next book as well. Just thank you so much for coming on and for putting this out into the world. Lexington, again, can be purchased wherever books are sold. Kim Wickens, thank you again, and happy holidays.
Thank you. Happy holidays. Thanks for having me, and thanks for reading.
Wanted to, of course, thank our sponsor of Breakaway Rail Talk, and that is Arian Pedigrees. And you can find them at arian.co.nz. Arian is Australia and New Zealand's leading thoroughbred pedigree provider. I've used it for pedigrees, catalog style reports, theoretical matings, and actually prior to this interview with Kim Wickens, I actually used it to look up, just as a lark, to look up Lexington to see if it would show up on the pedigree. And sure enough, shouldn't be surprised, Lexington, 1850 colt, and it shows that he's a son of Boston, goes back 7 generations, almost to the Stone Age. That's how far it goes back practically, and talks about all of the inbreeding, and there was a lot of inbreeding with Lexington, and just how prolific the family is. So I shouldn't have been surprised that Arian was right on top of it. They had Lexington help me with my interview with Kim, help me learn a little bit more about the overall industry. And I just can't thank them enough for being the sponsor of Breakaway Rail Talk. Arian Pedigrees, look to them for your answers.